In 1992, an entire church choir disappeared during rehearsal. No bodies, no sounds, no clues. 27 years later, a janitor's routine inspection uncovered what the police couldn't: a trapdoor, a Bible, and a name no one dared speak. If you're here, maybe you felt it too, that pull towards stories that never got closure. If this kind of truth matters to you, take a second to subscribe, leave a like, or drop a comment. Not every mystery gets solved, but every view helps keep these stories alive. Let's begin. It was the first Sunday of November in 1992, and Pine Hollow, a small Appalachian town with barely 3,000 residents, was cloaked in mist and silence. St. Bartholomew's Chapel stood on the outskirts, perched on a hill like a watchful relic of faith. Its whitewashed walls had yellowed with time, and the stained glass windows glowed faintly as morning light filtered through clouds. The chapel bell rang exactly at 9 a.m., a sound that had comforted generations. Inside, the air was filled with the scent of dust, old hymnals, and candle wax. 16 members of the choir gathered for their usual rehearsal before the main service. Their voices blended into a warm harmony that echoed through the wooden rafters. Among them were teenagers and elders, sopranos and basses, all devoted to the same sacred tradition. The choir director, Miss Evelyn Granger, was known for her discipline and gentle heart. At 54, she had led the choir for nearly 2 decades. On that morning, she wore her usual burgundy shawl and held her conductor's baton like a wand of divine order. They were practicing a rendition of Abide With Me when the sound abruptly cut off. The organ's final chord lingered unnaturally long, as if the air itself refused to let go. The pastor, waiting in his office down the hall, raised an eyebrow at the sudden silence. He glanced at his watch. 9:18, 5 minutes passed. Then 10. He finally walked toward the choir room, expecting to find perhaps a minor argument, a health scare, or someone fainting from stress. But when he opened the door, what he found was worse than his darkest fears. The room was empty. Chairs, pushed back from the semicircle. Sheet music still fluttering on music stands. The organ's keys depressed as though played by invisible hands. No blood, no signs of struggle, no exit unlocked. No broken glass, no footprints, only an eerie silence that clung to the chapel like wet linen. The police have been called. A search was launched. Volunteers went into the forest. The surrounding houses were checked one by one, but those 16 people, without a trace, had disappeared. July 12th, 2019. Exactly 27 years, 8 months, and 9 days since the choir vanished. Most people in Pine Hollow didn't talk about the chapel anymore. It had been closed for over a decade, left to rot atop the hill like a mausoleum of unanswered prayers. The town council had debated tearing it down, but the funds never came through, and some whispered that it simply wouldn't let itself be demolished. Enter Wendell Haynes. 63, widowed, former factory floor supervisor. Quiet, lived 3 blocks from the old chapel. He wasn't much of a church-goer, but when the town council posted a modest job opening for a part-time maintenance inspection at the chapel, he applied. "It's just a few hours a week," he told his daughter, "dusting off cobwebs and checking the structure. I'll be fine." The church key was still kept at the Pine Hollow Records office, locked in a steel drawer no one had touched in years. When the clerk handed it over, she hesitated before saying, "If you hear anything weird, Mr. Haynes, just walk out. Don't be a hero." Wendell chuckled awkwardly and waved it off. Ghost stories weren't his thing. He believed in tools, rust and rot, not the supernatural. That Friday morning, with a thermos of coffee and a flashlight clipped to his belt, Wendell made his way up the chapel steps. The air felt strangely colder than it should have for July. Not breeze cold. Empty, cold. Like the heat had been sucked out of the place years ago and never returned. The heavy doors groaned open. Dust curled in the shafts of sunlight slicing through broken stained glass. Pews sat like rows of forgotten soldiers. The altar was covered in a plastic sheet, yellowed and brittle. He got to work. First the windows, then the floor, then the rear hallway that led to the choir room, the same room where 16 people had vanished without a trace. Wendell paused at the door. He didn't believe in ghosts. He didn't believe in curses. But as his hand touched the doorknob, it trembled just enough for him to notice. He pushed the door open. The choir room looked like a time capsule. Music stands still, arranged in a half circle. Sheet music strewn about. The organ sat in the corner, silent and solemn. On the wall, a large crucifix leaned slightly to the left, as if it, too, had grown tired of waiting. Wendell swept the floor, checked for mold, made notes about structural decay on a clipboard. Then his foot hit something hollow. He froze, stepped back, tapped the floorboard again. Thud, thud, clunk. Wood didn't sound like that unless something was beneath it. Wendell knelt, brushed away a layer of dust and cobwebs. There it was, almost invisible. A faint outline of a square etched into the floor, maybe 3 feet by 3 feet. He pressed gently at the edge. It gave slightly, then popped. A hidden trapdoor. It hadn't been mentioned in any records. The police, according to town files, had inspected the entire structure. But Wendell, in his years of working with industrial equipment, knew that inspections rarely included floorboard resonance. With some effort, he pulled the panel open. A burst of stale air hit him, damp, cold, and disturbingly sweet, the kind of sweetness that comes not from flowers or fruit, but from something once alive. Beneath the trapdoor was a narrow passageway. Stone walls, old, not part of the chapel's blueprints. Wendell shone his flashlight down. The beam caught the outline of a Bible. Its cover was cracked, the binding held together by brittle thread. He reached down and pulled it out. The name on the inside cover made him flinch. Property of Evelyn Grangest, Bartholomew's choir director. Her handwriting was elegant, familiar to anyone who had grown up in Pine Hollow before 1992. Wendell had seen it once, as a boy, in a Christmas program she had signed, but below her name was a second line, scratched in hastily. Do not trust. And then, the ink had been violently smeared, as if someone had tried to erase the name beneath it, or been stopped halfway through. Wendell stared at the Bible, his breath visible now in the cold air of July. He didn't believe in ghosts, but something beneath this chapel had waited 27 years to be found. Wendell sat back on his heels, the Bible in his lap, his flashlight beam trembling just slightly against the stone opening. The silence in the choir room felt heavier now, like the building itself was watching him. He flipped through the brittle pages of the Bible. Most were ordinary, highlighted verses, handwritten sermon notes in the margins, a few old hymn lyrics scribbled in pencil. But between Psalm 91 and 92, something slipped out. A photograph, old, faded. It showed the choir group standing on the chapel steps, smiling, robes immaculate, hands clasped. Wendell recognized a few faces. Evelyn Granger front and center, a boy named Jacob Lyle, who had been 14 at the time, a woman holding a baby, probably her younger sibling. Wendell studied it closely, then squinted. There were 17 people in the photo, not 16, and the extra person wasn't wearing a robe. In the back row, partially obscured, stood a man in black. Tall, narrow-faced. No expression. No one in town ever mentioned a 17th person. Wendell turned the photo over. Written in delicate script was a single word, before. His skin prickled. He leaned back over the trapdoor and scanned the narrow stone shaft beneath. It looked more like a forgotten cellar than a passage. At the far end, he spotted what looked like rope? No, not rope. A robe, a choir robe. folded neatly atop a small wooden box, too perfectly placed, too clean, like someone or something had returned to leave it there long after the disappearance. Wendell hesitated. Every logical instinct told him to close the trapdoor and report the find. But he reached down anyway. He pulled the robe out. It was navy blue, lined with gold thread. On the collar, embroidered initials, E.G. Evelyn Granger. He opened the wooden box underneath. Inside were hymnals, burned at the edges. One was titled Voices of Praise, but someone had scratched out the word praise and written in jagged red ink, Voices Returned. The box also contained a cassette tape, labeled only March 8th, 1992, rehearsal. The day they vanished. Wendell exhaled slowly. He hadn't seen a working cassette player in years. He packed the Bible, the photo, the robe, and the tape into his satchel and shut the trapdoor. The moment it clicked shut, he heard a faint creaking noise from above. He froze, looked up at the rafters. Nothing. Just the groan of old wood. Or so he told himself. Wendell left the chapel without looking back and didn't stop walking until he reached his truck. When he slid into the driver's seat, he locked the doors and turned on the heater, even though it was 80 degrees outside. Because he was shaking. Back at his home, Wendell sat on the edge of his recliner, staring at the cassette tape on the coffee table. He pulled an old Sony player from a storage box in his garage. Miraculously, it still worked. He placed the tape inside, pressed play, click, hiss, then silence. Then, rehearsal log, March 8th, 1992. Director Evelyn Granger speaking. It's 8:46 a.m. We're preparing for Palm Sunday service. The group is strong this week. Harmonies are cleaner, energy's up. I sense the Lord's presence in our music today. A pause. Let's begin with It Is Well With My Soul. Chairs. Scraped, a few coughs, nervous laughter. Then the music began. A warm, rising harmony. Sopranos layered over altos, tenors anchoring from below. But halfway through the second verse, something happened. There was a faint low hum, barely audible beneath the music. Then one voice dropped out, then another, then another. The final note of the chorus rang out, held, far too long, followed by screaming, dozens of voices overlapping, incoherent, someone shouting, "No!" Another crying, a male voice gasping, "Don't look at it, don't look!" Then the tape abruptly ended. No click, no rewind, just silence. Wendell sat frozen in his living room. The air felt thick. His own breath sounded too loud. He removed the tape. Stared at the label again. March 8th, 1992, rehearsal. What had they seen? And more importantly, what had seen them? 3 days passed. Wendell didn't return to the chapel. He told the town clerk there was structural damage and he'd be submitting a report. But at night, he couldn't sleep. The image of the extra man in the photo, the name scratched from Evelyn's Bible, and the tape's final scream, it all swirled in his head like a storm. On the fourth morning, he went to Pine Hollow's historical archive, a dusty two-room extension of the library run by a retired teacher named Mrs. Lorna Pike. "I'm looking for something," he said, placing the photo down. "Do you recognize this man?" Mrs. Pike adjusted her glasses, looked closely. "Of course," she said. "That's Evelyn Granger. That's Jacob. Wait." Her finger hovered over the man in black. "That's not right," she said. "I was at that service. That man wasn't in the choir. He wasn't at the church." "Then who is he?" Mrs. Pike frowned. She walked to the back shelf and returned with an old yearbook. Pine Hollow High, 1966. She flipped through pages until she stopped on a portrait. "Here," she said. The same face, thinner, younger, still emotionless. "Matthew Calloway, who is he?" Mrs. Pike hesitated. "He was a teacher here, history and music. Brilliant but odd. He used to write strange compositions, things in Latin, chants no one understood. They let him go after an incident in '72. What kind of incident? He locked the doors during a school assembly, made the students sing a hymn he had written. People said it wasn't music, said it felt like a summoning. The principal collapsed. Half the students started crying. They found symbols carved under the stage. Wendell swallowed hard. Where is he now? Mrs. Pike closed the book. Dead or missing. No one really knows. But people say he changed. Changed how? They say he started talking to someone no one else could. See? Said the voices under the church told him he was chosen, that if people just listened long enough, they'd understand. Wendell left the archive in a daze. A man erased from memory. A rehearsal that ended in silence. A name scratched from a Bible. A photograph that shouldn't exist. He took out the Bible again, held it under light. On the smeared page where someone had tried to write, he finally made it out. Do not trust Monsieur Callow. The ink ended there. Matthew Calloway, the man no one dared speak about, the man who, somehow, had returned to that choir in 1992. Wendell didn't sleep that night. The cassette tape replayed. In his mind, the screams, the shouts, the moment that harmony turned into chaos. But even more unsettling than the tape was the thought of Calloway, a man no one remembered until they did. By morning, Wendell made a decision. He was going back to the chapel, not just to explore more, but to confirm what he feared. There was more beneath that floor. It was Saturday. Rain tapped lightly on the truck's windshield as he parked near the chapel. The town was quiet, always was. He unlocked the church doors with the key that now felt like a key to something else entirely. Inside, everything looked the same. Dust, decay, forgotten pews. But as he stepped into the choir room, the air shifted again, colder than before, like something knew he was back. He opened the trapdoor. The robe and Bible were gone. He had them at home. But the box was still there, empty now, save for a small line of chalk in a spiral pattern, and a crack in the stone wall that hadn't been there before. He shone his flashlight on the crack. It wasn't natural. It was too symmetrical, like a seam, not a fracture. Wendell pressed his hand against it. It gave a little, just enough. Then the wall shifted, a second passage, narrower, damper. Stale air oozed from it like breath from a dying thing. He didn't want to go in. He went in anyway. The corridor descended at a gentle slope. The walls changed from stone to something older, packed earth veined with roots like skeletal fingers. The air grew warmer, but not in a good way. Not comforting warmth, rotting warmth. After maybe 10 steps, the space opened into a chamber, about 15 feet wide, circular, domed ceiling, and on the walls, drawings, carved with something sharp, hundreds of them. Faces, choir robes, notes on a musical staff that made no sense. Symbols, not Latin, not English, but older. Wrong. In the center of the room, a broken podium, and next to it, a chair, facing the wall, empty, until Wendell blinked, because it wasn't empty anymore. A man sat in the chair now, or the shape of one. He didn't move, but Wendell could see the faint outline of a choir robe, and in his lap, something glowed faintly red. Wendell took a step back, then another, then the figure turned its head, not fast, not sudden, just slow, deliberate rotation, until it faced Wendell fully. The face was blank, no eyes, no mouth, just smooth, pale flesh, like wax left in the sun. Wendell ran. He didn't stop until he burst out of the chapel doors, tripping on the last stair, landing hard in the mud. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The blank face was burned into his mind. That night, Wendell called someone he hadn't spoken to in 20 years. Detective Alan Kearns. Now retired, Kearns had been the lead investigator on the original choir case. He had left Pine Hollow quietly, never offering a statement to the press. People said the case broke him. "Wendell Haynes?" Kearns said on the phone. "I remember you. You used to work at the mill, right? I need to talk to you, Wendell said. About the chapel, about the choir. A long pause. Then, you found it, didn't you? I think. I found part of it. Another silence, this time heavier. I'll be there tomorrow morning, Kearns said. Don't go back down there. Don't talk to anyone else. And don't listen to anything coming from under the chapel. Wendell's skin prickled. Why not? Because they're not singing anymore. The next morning, Wendell met Detective Alan Kearns at Pine Hollow's diner. The old man had aged, but not softly. His face looked carved from exhaustion, his eyes sharp, yet sunk too far into his skull, as if he'd spent the last 2 decades squinting at something no one else could see. He sat in the booth without greeting, placed a dusty manila folder on the table, and slid it across. Wendell opened it. Inside were photos from 1992, crime scene shots the public never saw, the choir room, the robes, sheet music scattered in strange geometric patterns. But one photo stopped him cold. It showed the trapdoor, the exact one Wendell had found. There, it is, Wendell whispered. You knew about it? Kearns nodded slowly. We found it a week into the investigation, he said. Didn't tell anyone, even other officers. I was the one who opened it, the one who climbed down. He leaned forward, eyes dark. I saw drawings, like cave paintings. I saw a wooden podium and blood-stained pages. But we didn't find bodies. We found a hole, something so deep the flashlight couldn't touch the bottom. Wendell's hand went cold. Why didn't you tell anyone? Kearns didn't answer, at first. He sipped his coffee. Then, because the day after we found that chamber, one of my guys, Rogers, walked into the chapel alone, said he heard someone singing from below, said it sounded like his mother. She'd been dead 5 years. Wendell leaned in. What happened? We found his body behind the organ, Kearns said. Ears bled out. Heart exploded. No sign of struggle. Medical report called it a spontaneous coronary event. He paused, but his mouth was full of dirt. He slid another photo across the table. Roger's corpse. Pale, stiff, dried mud packed between his lips. I buried everything, Kearns said. The evidence, the photos, even the report. Told myself I was protecting the town. Wendell looked up from the file. But you weren't. You were protecting yourself. Kearns didn't deny it. There's something buried under that church, the old cop said. Not just people. Something older than the choir. Older than the town. I don't think it's evil. I think it's hungry. They returned to the chapel that afternoon. Together. Wendell brought the Bible, the cassette tape, the photo. Kearns brought a handgun and a voice recorder. Just in case, he said. They opened the trapdoor, climbed down. The first chamber was unchanged. Dust, spiral carvings. The seam in the wall, still slightly ajar. Kearns looked around. Exactly as I remembered. They stepped through into the second passage. Wendell led them to the circular chamber, but this time, the chair was gone. The podium smashed to pieces, and on the wall, carved deep. He calls the notes. They echo through the soil. Kearns stared at it, silent. Then something whispered. Both men froze. It came from the wall behind them, a low hum. Not quite a voice. Not quite music. But it mimicked the notes from the rehearsal tape. Kearns turned slowly, hand on his gun. The dirt wall pulsed slightly, as if breathing. And then from the earth itself came a voice. You brought it back. The blood book, the broken song. Wendell staggered back. Kearns raised the recorder and hit record. What are you? He demanded. No answer. Only the sound of a choir. 16 distinct voices, singing off-key, like someone trying to remember a song they once knew. Then silence. Kearns lowered the recorder. We're done here. They turned to leave, but the passage was gone, where there was once a door. Solid wall. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then the wall behind them opened, not like a door, not like a crack. It simply peeled back, like wet paper. Beyond it, another room, bigger, brighter, lined with stone choir stalls, and in each one, a robe, hanging, upright, but not on mannequins, not on coat hangers. The robes floated, as if worn by something invisible. Kearns raised his gun. No sudden moves, he whispered. If one of them turns, we... But before he could finish, the robes began to sway. Not in the wind. There was no wind down here. They swayed like they were singing, and from somewhere unseen, that voice returned. The 17th sang wrong. The hymn turned sour. So we kept them. We keep them still. The air grew thicker. Kearns stepped back. What does that mean? Who was the 17th? The voice didn't answer, but the robes began to turn toward them. That was enough. Kearns fired 3 shots into the center robe. The robe collapsed, empty, but the others remained. Wendell grabbed Kearns' arm. We have to go. Now! They ran. Back through the chamber. The passage had reopened, barely. They slipped through, climbed the ladder, slammed the trapdoor shut behind them. Back in the chapel, they collapsed on the dusty pews. Neither spoke for a full minute. Then Kearns said, "We're not dealing with a murderer, or a cult, or a haunting." Wendell looked up. "We're dealing with a hymn that listens back." Detective Kearns sat at Wendell's kitchen table long after sunset, nursing the same cup of coffee for hours. Neither man had spoken since they left the chapel. The tape lay between them. The photo too. And Wendell's hands trembled slightly as he reached across the table, pointing to the old choir photo once again. "There's something wrong with this image," he muttered. Kearns nodded slowly. "You mean besides the fact that we counted 17 people and only ever had 16 in the choir?" "No," Wendell said. "Not just that. Look at the shadows." Kearns leaned in. Each choir member cast a shadow backward, long and faint, just as expected from a morning sun. But the man in the back, the one in black, his shadow cast forward. Against the light, Kearns stared. That's not possible." They scanned the photo again. Every detail, every face. And then they saw something else. Behind the last row of choir members, just above the shoulder of Evelyn Granger, was a hand, a 5th hand on a row that only had 4 people. Long, fingers at grey skin, no visible owner. Wendell pushed back from the table. "This photo wasn't taken before they vanished." "What do you mean?" "I think it was taken after." He looked at Kearns. "And I think they were already gone." The next morning, Wendell received an envelope on his doorstep. No stamp, no return address. Inside were 2 items, a second photograph, this time of the chapel interior, taken from the choir loft, a folded note. "You brought back the song, finish it, or more will join." Wendell studied the photograph. The choir room again. Same room, same architecture. But in this one, the trapdoor was already open, and something, barely visible, was climbing out. A hand. Not human. Long, stretched, thin, as reed. He dropped the photo. The back of it was labelled Rehearsal 1992, reopened 2019. He called Kearns immediately. "Someone's been watching us." That night, they returned to the chapel one last time. Wendell brought the Bible. Kearns brought the tape, and they both brought a plan. "We're not going back down," Wendell said. "We're finishing it from here." They set up a speaker in the center of the choir room. Connected the cassette player. "We're giving the hymn back," Kearns said, "returning what they wanted." As the tape played, the room seemed to change. Not visibly, not physically, but something in the air bent, twisted. The music filled the church. But it sounded clearer than before. No screams, no hum, just a perfect harmony. The room sang back. The pews creaked as if leaning forward, and then, from behind the altar, the choir began to appear, not as ghosts, not as shadows, but flesh. One by one, 16 figures emerged, dressed in robes, mouths open in song, but their eyes, empty, white, blinded. They didn't look at Wendell or Kearns. They looked up, toward the rafters, as if waiting for something. Then the 17th figure appeared, clad in black. The man from the photo, but his face had changed, no longer blank. Now it was smiling, wide, grotesque, knowing. Wendell stepped forward. "You're not Calloway." The man tilted his head. "I was before. What are you now?" The man's smile deepened. "The only one who remembers the end of the hymn." He raised his hands, and the walls of the chapel cracked. The air inside the chapel cracked like glass. Thin fractures spreading across the wooden panels, the windows vibrating without shattering. Light bent strangely, like it was bending around something invisible. The 16 choir members, ghostly flesh and blinded eyes, kept singing. Their mouths moved in perfect rhythm. Their song was no longer a hymn. It was a chant, a name, over and over, the same sound. "Kayla, Kayla, Kayla," Detective Kearns whispered. "That's not Latin. That's not any language I've heard." But Wendell knew. Somewhere deep inside he knew. It's a name, a true name, one that was never meant to be sung aloud. The 17th figure, Calloway or what had become of him, stepped onto the broken pulpit, now whole again beneath his feet. His black robe seemed woven from the shadows themselves, and his smile never faded. "You've heard the first verse," he said, "but you haven't heard the last." He raised both hands, and the choir sang louder. The chapel shook. The trapdoor burst open behind them, flinging itself upward like a mouth unhinging. Wind poured from it, impossibly cold and soaked in, the scent of grave dirt and old blood. Kearns raised his gun. "I swear, I'll put a bullet in you," Calloway laughed. "Bullets have no power here, not where the song root reaches." He turned to Wendell. "You opened the door. You found the blood book. You woke the hymn. You are the final verse." "No," Wendell whispered. "No, I'm not part of this." But the hymn changed. It began to echo his name. Wendell Haynes. The voices became dozens, then hundreds. Male, female, young, old, all singing him into the earth. Wendell dropped to his knees, clutching his ears. Kearns rushed to the cassette player and hit stop. Silence fell like an axe. The choir vanished, the trapdoor slammed shut, and Calloway screamed a shriek like torn metal before flickering out like a flame in wind. For a long moment, nothing moved, not even breath. Then Wendell lifted his head. "They were using me to finish it," he said. "I was the closing line." Kearns sat beside him. "Then why didn't they?" Wendell looked down at his hands, at the Bible still gripped there. "No one can finish a hymn written in unblooded ink," he said, realizing. "The last line requires sacrifice." That night, Wendell couldn't sleep. He sat by the fire, turning through the pages of Evelyn Granger's Bible, hoping to find one verse, any verse, that might offer hope. Instead, tucked in the back cover, he found a letter, dated March 7th, 1992, the day before the choir vanished. "If this reaches the light, I have failed. We were warned not to sing the 17th arrangement." Matthew Calloway wrote it from a dream. He said it came from beneath the church, but I believe he didn't dream it. I believe he dug it up, from under the chapel, from the stone that sings. The others believe it's just a song, but I've heard it humming in my sleep for weeks. I fear it's alive. I fear it's hungry. Pray for us. Wendell let the page fall from his hand. He remembered what Calloway had said earlier. The song route reaches. The hymn wasn't bound to the chapel, it was spreading. The next morning, Wendell received another envelope. This time, it was mailed. Real postage, real return address. It was from a church in Boonville, Kentucky. Inside, a photo, a choir, 16 people in matching robes. But Wendell's eyes immediately went to the 17th person. Same face, same smile, same black robe. Calloway had moved on. The hymn had found a new choir. Wendell sat motionless on the edge of his bed, the photograph from Kentucky trembling in his hands. Same composition, same robes, same haunting symmetry, and there, again, was Calloway, smiling like he'd never left Pine Hollow, like he never had to. He called Kearns. The detective answered on the second ring. "I got the photo," Wendell said. "The hymn's not finished. It just moved." There was silence on the other end. Then Kearns said, "I know." "What do you mean you know?" "Because I got a letter this morning too, from a church in Alabama. Their music director disappeared last week. They found his car in the woods, doors open, cassette still playing." Wendell's stomach turned. Kearns continued, "I called the church, asked them what hymn he had been working on." "What did they say?" "They said he'd been writing something unusual, a 17th arrangement. Said he claimed he dreamt it. Said the notes came to him while he slept." Wendell dropped the phone, picked it up again with shaking hands. "They're copying the pattern." "No," Kearns said. "It's copying itself, like a virus, like a seed taking, root in new soil." Wendell paced the room. "The hymn isn't a composition, it's a summoning. And every time someone completes it, every time someone sings it to the final bar, it digs deeper." Kearns was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "We have to burn it." That afternoon, they met at the chapel. The fire was planned, not arson, not recklessness, a burial, of a kind. They boarded the windows, soaked the walls, gathered every hymn sheet, every audio recording, every photograph, even the Bible. Wendell hesitated at that one. "You sure?" Kearns asked. Wendell nodded. "It's not the word anymore. It's been used, twisted." He placed it on the altar. Then Kearns lit the match. The chapel went up fast, faster than it should have. Wood cracked, flames roared. The choir loft collapsed into itself, taking the organ and the pulpit down with it. And just before the roof gave in, they heard the singing, not in the flames. Under them, the fire hadn't touched the root. Later, standing in the ash, Kearns spoke first. "It's still there." "Yeah," Wendell replied, "but at least now it has no mouth." Kearns looked at him. "You're wrong. It never needed a mouth. It only needed a listener." That night, Wendell lay awake. The envelope from Kentucky sat on his desk. He hadn't thrown it away. Couldn't. And though he tried not to look at it, his eyes kept drifting to the 17th face. The black robe, the smile, Calloway, the man from 1992, still alive, or something pretending to be. And then, the phone rang. No caller ID, just static on the other end. Then a familiar voice. Not Wendell's, not Kearns. "We finished the hymn." Wendell sat up straight. "It's beautiful." The dirt sang back. "But there's more. So many verses left to write. And your name is on the next line." Then a dial tone, then silence. Wendell didn't sleep. He took every photo, every letter, every fragment of the hymn that remained. He buried them deep, poured concrete over the hole. But in the morning, when he came back, the concrete was cracked. 3 days after the chapel burned, Wendell returned to the site with a crowbar and a flashlight. He shouldn't have, but the crack in the concrete wouldn't leave his thoughts. He had poured 5 bags, reinforced it with steel mesh, covered it with gravel. Yet the split had formed clean down the center, like something underneath was pushing back. He cleared the gravel, bent to inspect the line. It was wider now, and from it came a sound, very faint, a single note, held just long enough to chill his bones. Back home, he reviewed every newspaper from 1992 again. He was looking for something he had ignored before. Anything about Calloway. But Calloway had been a phantom even then. No obituary, no family, no employment records, nothing before Pine Hollow, nothing after. Until Wendell remembered something else. The church's founder, a man named Elijah Callow, no middle name, built the first version of the chapel in 1852. Wendell pulled up the only known photograph, grainy, sepia, brittle. It was a group shot, parishioners, founding elders, musicians. And there, standing in the back, wearing black. Same face, same smile. Calloway hadn't written the hymn. He was the hymn. Wendell called Kearns again, told him everything, the concrete, the photograph, the sound. Kearns answered in a voice Wendell didn't recognize. "Don't go back down." "I'm not." "You already are," Kearns said softly. "It's not about places anymore. You've heard it now. You hum it in your sleep. I do too." Wendell was silent. "Wendell," Kearns said, "we didn't burn it. The fire didn't reach it. It doesn't live in wood and paper. It lives in resonance." Wendell whispered, "It lives in people." That night, Wendell did something he swore he never would. He listened to the tape again, this time through headphones. The voices were clearer now, not just screams, not chaos, words. A verse. "When the mouth opens wide and the throat is the tomb, let 16 echo light, but the 17th must bloom." He pulled the headphones off. The tape recorder was still playing. He hadn't hit play. He turned off every device in the house, cut the power, pulled the plug from the wall. But the music continued, from the basement, where no player existed. He descended the steps, slowly, cautiously. But when he reached the bottom, the room was empty, except for one thing. A black robe, folded neatly on, a chair, on top of it a cassette labeled "Only," final verse. He picked it up. On the back of the label was a single word, handwritten in crimson ink, "Yours." Wendell drove for hours. He didn't know where he was going. But when the radio cut out in the middle of an open field, he stopped. He got out, stood beneath the stars, and for the first time in 30 years, he began to hum the melody, softly, quietly, not even realizing he was doing it, until another voice joined in, then another, and another, until the night sang with a choir unseen, and Wendell finally understood. The 17th was not a person. It was a part, an idea, a placeholder for the one who remembers. Back in Pine Hollow, Kearns sat alone. He knew what was happening. He knew Wendell was becoming the next verse, and he knew he couldn't stop it. But he had one card left to play. In the old box from the evidence locker, sealed and hidden for 30 years, he retrieved a file. Case 17 to 92, marked closed. Inside, pages of transcribed musical notation. Not written by Calloway, not by Evelyn, but by Wendell himself. The last page was dated March 11th, 1992, a full week after the choir vanished. "Whoever finds this," it read, "don't finish the hymn. Let silence be the final chord." Wendell awoke in a motel room 4 states away. He didn't remember checking in, didn't remember sleeping. But there he was, fully clothed, a cassette recorder on the bedside table. It was playing, but no tape was inside. Still, the music played. The 17th arrangement, now complete, with his voice at the center of it. He stood slowly, walked to the window. Outside, a church steeple rose over the tree line. Not Pine Hollow, but close. Too close. He grabbed the recorder, pulled the plug, only to realize there was no cord. At the same time, back in Pine Hollow, Detective Alan Kearns opened the doors to what was once the Mount Hope Baptist Chapel. The fire had devoured everything above ground, but the foundation had held. And now, at its center, the trapdoor had returned. No burn marks, no ash, no sign of time passed. Kearns approached it slowly. On the wood, freshly carved, were 4 words, "Still not the end." He descended. One step, then another. The air felt thicker now, not musty, alive, as if the stairwell was breathing. When he reached the bottom, he found the chamber unchanged. Same stone floor, same black altar, same silence. But the choir stalls were full again, not robes, people, 16 of them, eyes closed, hands folded, mouths gently humming. Each one wore an identical tag pinned to their chest, resonance captured, awaiting verse. Kearns stood frozen. Then, a 17th chair emerged from the darkness, empty, waiting. Back in the motel, Wendell stood over the cassette recorder. It had stopped, but something else had begun. A low vibration in the floor, the walls, his chest. He felt it in his bones, as if his very marrow was being tuned. He opened the motel door, and every light on the street flickered in rhythm. Across the road, a choir stood in the churchyard, not singing, humming, to him. Wendell knew then. He was not the final verse. He was the instrument. Days later, a janitor at Mount Hope was doing a routine inspection of the church's perimeter when he heard humming. He followed the sound to a clearing, to the fire-blackened ruin, to the trap door. It was open. He peered inside and saw far below a single chair, occupied by a man in a black robe, his head tilted forward as if asleep, but his mouth was moving, singing something that had no language, only resonance. The janitor backed away. The voice followed him, not in sound, but in his blood. 3 months later, across the country, churches began to report strange occurrences, choirs disappearing mid-service, cassette tapes appearing in sanctuaries with no return address, unmarked black robes left neatly folded on pulpits, congregants humming melodies they didn't remember learning. Every incident had one thing in common: a note, typed on old paper, no signature. "We finish what's left, we sing what you forget, we are the 17th, and now, so are you." If this story stayed with you, if something about it felt too real to be fiction, consider subscribing, share it with someone who still wonders about the people the world forgot, and leave a comment. We read every single one, because sometimes remembering is the only way to stop it from happening again.